In October 1998, it was widely reported around the world that an entire football team had been killed after a bolt of lightning had struck the pitch during a match in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Here it is, being reported on the old BBC News website, in The Independent, The Irish Times. I could go on, but suffice to say, it was a big story that received a lot of press coverage. Those of you old enough to have been consciously following the news in the late 1990s might even remember seeing it reported at the time. Aside from the shocking and tragic nature of an entire football team losing their lives in an instant, the angle that most newspapers and news reports tended to focus on was the unusual distribution of despair when the lightning struck. Curiously, whilst one team had been killed, and that is to say, all 11 players out on the pitch at the time, the opposition, who were the away team, had come out of it unscathed, suffering a few burns here and there, but no fatalities. According to the fairly terse BBC report, which was the first to be published covering the deaths in the UK, and was subsequently largely parroted by other publications, 11 men from one team had been killed, whilst 30 men had been injured, in the catastrophe in eastern Kasai province in DR Congo. The last of the 6 single-sentence paragraphs, and perhaps the most pertinent, read, quote, "There was no official confirmation of the report. A rebel war affects much of the east of the country." End quote. In the near quarter century since that game, the Congolese footballer killing lightning strike has become an established fact. You can read about it in numerous books, articles have been published recounting those tragic events, and social media posts bringing the story to people's attention for the first time seem to go viral every couple of years. Though, oddly, in all of this time, that original, very sparsely detailed account of what had happened, which the BBC felt required to caveat with a disclaimer about a lack of official confirmation, has never really been further substantiated. No personal testimonies, no comments from widowed family members, not even any officially supported theories as to why one team had all died and another had been spared. That is not to say that there weren't unofficial theories and explanations. Oh no, there have been lots of those, as you can imagine, some of which have been parroted so many times that some have begun to report them, wrongly, as though they were official findings. The most notable, perhaps, is that the entire Bashanga team, who survived, were wearing moulded studs in their boots made out of rubber or plastic. Meanwhile, the Bena Tshadi team, who were all killed, had been wearing metal studs in their boots. The theory being that metal conducts electricity very easily, whilst rubber and plastic are insulators and therefore have higher resistance. This is a theory, you can't argue with that, but as any physicist watching this video will currently be shouting at their screens, it is not a very good one. A bolt of lightning will typically have hundreds of millions of volts, and with a voltage like that, capable of travelling hundreds of meters through the air, which is itself an insulator, some rubber or plastic studs are going to make the square root of 0 difference to your chance of survival if struck by lightning. Now, that is not to say that rubber or plastic studs couldn't help you in a storm in comparison to metal studs, since lightning looks for the path of least resistance, and if your rubberiness makes you more resistant, you might be spared. But if you are actually struck by lightning, even a big pair of rubber wellies would be unable to provide you with any meaningful protection, let alone some poxy little rubber moulded studs. Still, that was probably a better theory than the one floated around at the time in both DR Congo and abroad, which was that the unusual pattern of deaths had been the result of witch doctors, curses, and Mad Hat superstition. In fairness, the newspapers didn't claim this was the actual cause, they just reported on it being suggested on the ground in the Congo. Curses, witch doctors, and voodoo spells are a common feature of African football, particularly at that time, and the freak incident was said to have had accusations invoking the supernatural abound. Superstition and rituals are prevalent in football in just about every corner of the globe. Former Birmingham City boss Barry Fry once urinated in all 4 corners of St Andrews during the mid-1990s in an attempt to break a gypsy curse, though, oddly enough, his pee did not appease the paranormal enough to prevent him from losing his job not long after that. America de Cali fans felt obliged to perform an exorcism at their home ground in the late 1970s after a dentist was said to have cursed the club and swore that they would not win another trophy if they turned professional in 1948. The Red Devils won their first league championship the following season, though they are still yet to get their hands on the Copa Libertadores, having been losing finalists on 4 occasions, which is a record among non-Libertadores winning clubs. However, when it comes to mystical explanations for things happening in football, Africa is in a league of its own. From juju pots and objects designed to scare away evil spirits and voodoo practices in order to curse the opposition in West Africa, to magical charms and all-powerful witch doctors in Central Africa, the supernatural is still frequently invoked in African football to this day. At the 2014 World Cup, a Ghanaian witch doctor claimed responsibility for Cristiano Ronaldo's injury going into the tournament, swearing to rule the Ballon d'Or winner out of Portugal's tie with Ghana. But Ronaldo started in the game and scored as Ghana lost 2-1 in their final group game. When the Ivory Coast won the African Cup of Nations in 1992, it was alleged that the country's Minister of Sport had hired several witch doctors to try and bring the team success, and the doctors were subsequently involved in a 10-year row with the Ivorian government over a lack of acknowledgement for the role that they had played in that success. I could list, quite literally, hundreds of other examples, and in 2016, the Rwandan FA actually officially banned all witchcraft after a player was said to have performed a ritual during a game and scored within seconds of doing so. If you want to get all supernatural in a Rwandan football match now, you'd best be prepared to cough up the 100,000 Rwandan francs fine, which is equivalent to over £70. The Confederation of African Football have taken similar steps over the last 20 years, eager to cast aside practices that they felt perpetuated a third world image of the continent and that they believed played a part in Germany narrowly being awarded the 2006 World Cup hosting rights with 1 vote more than South Africa. So when an entire football team was struck down in the prime of their lives, all said to be aged between 20 and 35, the team from Bashanga, who had all survived, were reportedly accused of employing witch doctors and curses that had caused the deaths of the Bena Tshadi players. In case you thought that all of this couldn't get any weirder, that very same weekend, during a South African Premier Soccer League match between Moroka Swallows and Jomo Cosmos, lightning struck the pitch in Johannesburg. Half the players from both teams immediately dropped to the ground when the lightning struck, most writhing in agony and clutching their ears. That incident has been more widely covered in the subsequent years, and there is even footage which still exists of the lightning strike available online. Fortunately, no one was killed, but 3 players were badly hurt, one of whom, and I genuinely can't quite believe that I'm saying this, a reporter thought that it would be a good idea to try and interview whilst he was still laying on the ground, having been struck by lightning. I mean, I always find it cruel that athletes are forced in front of a camera when they are physically and mentally drained, with emotions running high seconds after completing a sporting event, and are expected to just speak eloquently about the match or event that has just unfolded, but that takes things to a whole new level. The Jomo Cosmos boss, whose side were leading 2-0 at the time, with not long left on the clock, even went so far as to suggest that 2 of the Swallows players had exaggerated their injuries because they were losing, presumably accepting that possibly the lightning might actually have done some damage to one of them. The first outlet to report on the lightning strike and the deaths in DR Congo was a newspaper called L'Avenir, based in the Congolese capital of Kinshasa. Their initial report was as light on detail as all those that followed, since L'Avenir was the only primary source to report on the incident from inside DR Congo. In some respects, it is unsurprising that the details were so murky and difficult to source, since the Congo was a nation at war at the time, in a partly internal and partly proxy conflict which claimed 5.4 million lives in less than 5 years, and came just a year after the end of another mass conflict in the Congo which spanned just 6 months but still claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. So, at this point, we will try to deal solely with the facts and what we do know. For a start, DR Congo is the lightning capital of the world. The country has the highest frequency of lightning strikes of any nation on Earth, and has individual regions which can receive more than 200 lightning bolts per square kilometre every year, or more than 500 per square mile in old money. Don't worry if you don't know much about lightning, you are not alone, but all you need to know is that that is a lot. So, lightning strikes in DR Congo are not rare. Could a single lightning bolt really kill 11 people though? The answer to that question is technically yes, but it is extremely rare. Roughly 85 to 90% of people survive being struck by lightning, and multiple fatality bolts are highly unusual. When they do occur, such as a recent horrific event at a Seventh-day Adventist church in Rwanda, which claimed the lives of 16 churchgoers via a single bolt, it tends to be because lightning has struck an object, such as a building or a tree, and the energy has then radiated out along the ground, endangering any life forms within the vicinity of the object that has been struck. There are also incidents in which a lightning bolt can cause a fire, construction failure, or explosion, resulting in numerous deaths, but those deaths are not caused directly by the lightning bolt, as it is claimed that the footballers were in DR Congo. The most fatal lightning bolt ever recorded was an incident in Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia as it was then, in 1975, when lightning struck a hut in which 21 people were sheltering from the rain, all of whom were killed. Again though, this story is fraught with various theories and very little hard evidence of what actually happened. It is quite possible that the lightning bolt itself did not kill everyone inside the hut, but that the bolt caused paralysis among those inside the hut and caused the hut to catch fire, leaving them to burn to death. This is a jolly subject, I know, but the crucial point here is that it is vanishingly rare for as many as 11 people to die from a single lightning bolt. And on the handful of recorded cases of something like that happening, the circumstances are radically different to 22 players sharing a football pitch and 11 of them, all from the same team, being killed whilst the other 11 survive. So, is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? No. And we're not just talking about a million to one shot here, but more like many billions to one. That is not to say that it couldn't happen or that it didn't happen. Freak events do still happen. But from all of the available evidence that I can find from multiple language sources, I certainly wouldn't say that I've seen enough to definitively rule that it did definitely happen. Which begs the question, if 11 players on one team weren't killed by a single lightning bolt at a football match in October 1998 whilst the opposition survived, why would it be reported? Why does it serve anyone to make up a story like that? What is the benefit of the lie? Sometimes we see fictitious stories written about secretive states like North Korea or Eritrea in Western media, where the motive is pretty straightforward: clicks and ad revenue. The difficulty in sourcing accurate information from these countries means that any old lie can be told 1,000 times before anyone actually bothers to check and see if there is any substantial evidence. And it makes it very difficult to disprove fantastical stories, even if there is no evidence for them having happened in the first place. Similarly, you'll often find news reports in those kinds of states telling equally fictitious stories about Western countries, primarily as propaganda in those cases, either to denigrate the country in question or simply to elevate the status of the broadcasting nation. As in, either, these people over here hate you, or look at how bad things are elsewhere, aren't you fortunate to have been born or live here? But this story broke in the country of its origin, DR Congo, and was reported pretty straightly as it had been in DR Congo around the rest of the world, making any motive to invent a story fairly opaque. And it's at this point that we have to explore the realms of speculation. Well, not even speculation in fact, just information which you might find interesting and which may or may not relate to the Bena Tshadi case. L'Avenir, the newspaper that broke the story in DR Congo before it spread worldwide, was a weekly newspaper at the time, having been founded just 2 years earlier. But it has been a daily newspaper since 2006 and currently employs around 300 journalists. You can probably pretty safely assume that they were employing far fewer than 300 journalists back in 1998. L'Avenir is part of the wider Groupe L'Avenir, a Congolese media conglomerate comprising of newspapers, TV channels, and radio stations, which is run by a man named Pius Maubilu Umbayu Mukala. Maubilu is a pro-government businessman who also owns a freight business and has long been involved in Congolese politics. Until recently, he served as the Minister of State, the Minister of Town Planning, and as the Minister of Housing in the Congolese government, all while still running his freight and media empire. I know, he must have been a pretty busy man. Maubelu held those positions of high office under the Congolese Prime Minister Sylvester Ilunga until Ilunga was ousted in January 2021 when the National Assembly passed a motion of no confidence in his cabinet, thus forcing his resignation. Ilunga was replaced by DR Congo's current Prime Minister, Samalou Conde, who was preferred to his predecessor by DR Congo's recently elected President, Félix Tshisekedi. Ilunga was a technocrat and a long-term ally of Joseph Kabila, who led DR Congo as president from 2001 to 2019, having replaced his father, Laurent Kabila, as president just 10 days after his father was assassinated by an 18-year-old. The story of DR Congo in the 1990s is a tale of two wars, the First Congo War and the Second Congo War, both of which will be vaguely familiar to any of you who watched my documentary covering the dark truth behind this iconic World Cup moment. The First Congo War, which took place in October 1996 to May 1997, brought an end to the brutal dictatorship of President Mobutu, as Laurent Kabila was installed as the country's new president and the country's name reverted from Zaire back to DR Congo. However, Kabila's regime was always an uneasy coalition, propped up by Rwandan state support, leading to accusations that Kabila's government was really just nothing more than a Rwandan puppet regime. Kabila, keen to rubbish those allegations and shrug off that reputation, attempted to cut ties with Rwanda. But Rwanda didn't take particularly kindly to losing influence over DR Congo, so they switched sides and began backing rebel troops in Rwanda a little over a year after they had played a key role in putting Kabila in place. Kabila's government was backed by the likes of Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, who all offered military aid and support in the subsequent conflict. Meanwhile, rebel groups received the backing of not just Rwanda, but also the neighbouring states of Burundi and Uganda. What is extraordinary about the influence of those three nations on DR Congo is the fact that all three of them combined still wouldn't make up even a third of DR Congo's total landmass. It was an absolutely barbaric conflict, the deadliest anywhere in the world since World War II, as enemies became allies, then enemies again, then allies, then enemies again. Ceasefires were signed, then violated. Breakaway regions of the Congo became entirely ungovernable. Genocidal rape became a mass weapon of war, and ethnic conflicts erupted, all whilst foreign powers, who claimed to be in DR Congo for humanitarian reasons, all too often exploited the nation's vast natural resources. As the war became a stalemate and most foreign actors lost the will to remain involved, the Second Congo War officially ended in July 2003. But that wasn't the reality for many people living in DR Congo. So much hatred had manifested and internal division been stoked, with over 25 separate armed militias existing in DR Congo by 2003, that fighting didn't stop just because of an agreement between Kabila and Rwanda. By 2008, a decade after the war had begun, and 5 years after it officially ended, 45,000 people were still being killed in the country every single month. That means that every 6 months, as many people were killed in supposed peacetime Congo as died on all sides during the 20-year war in Afghanistan, fought between the US, their allies, and the Northern Alliance against various Islamist groups, most notably the resurgent Taliban. In reality, the war, and the wars within wars, have never stopped in DR Congo. Sometimes the conflicts in certain regions are more intense than in others, and at certain times. But death and destruction have become the status quo for many living in DR Congo. I promise you that this is not a total tangent. I provide that information solely as context, because in October 2000, 2 years after L'avenir broke the lightning strike story, there was an attack on Pius Maubelu and Bayu Mukala's house. The attack came shortly after Maubelu had been appointed as an MP by the soon-to-be assassinated President Kabila, during one of the deadliest periods of the conflict. Just a week after the attack on Maubelu's home, L'avenir's offices were raided, their computers were seized, and journalists were arrested on the orders of General Nawe Yav. Maubelu himself was spared, but his bodyguard received 42 lashes, had his gun confiscated, and was accused of being a spy for the rebellion forces who were at war with Kabila. General Yav, the man who, as I say, ordered that operation and those arrests, in another extraordinary twist, and I hope you're still following me here, was later one of the 2 top military officers, and one of over 80 people in total, to be put on trial following Kabila's assassination. That was, again, extraordinarily, in spite of the fact that Yav had actually ordered the arrest of many of the earliest suspects in the Kabila case, before he himself was accused of being involved. Human rights groups were highly critical of the trial, claiming that many of the huge number of defendants clearly had not been involved. In the end, 26 people, including General Yav, were sentenced to death, though none were actually killed by the state, just permanently imprisoned, 64 people were jailed on lesser sentences, and 45 people were exonerated. For the record, this could all just be an absolutely wild tangent which is totally irrelevant to the lightning strike story, but it is an awful lot of strange coincidences, and my instincts tell me that, clearly, at the very least, there is far more to this story than what was first reported in 1998, to which there has never been any additional accounts, recollections, or investigations covering what happened in the more than 20 years since. We still do not know if the players supposedly died on impact when the lightning struck, whether they died later on in hospital, why one team are reported to have all died and their opponents to have all survived. We don't even know the names of any of the deceased players. So, for once, this isn't me setting the record straight, dispelling a frequently repeated myth, or telling a tale from football's past in meticulous detail, but rather, it is just me saying, I don't know. I have told you everything that we know for a fact, along with a mixture of potentially relevant and potentially irrelevant information. And as someone who has watched or listened to a fair amount of true crime TV series, films and podcasts, I know that might seem underwhelming and anticlimactic at first, but it need not be. In fact, I can see a way in which this could become the most fascinating Sevens video yet. I know from previous videos covering Zaire's appearance at the World Cup, and from my What If Congo National Team Starting 11 video, that we do have some subscribers in DR Congo, and vastly more from the wider diaspora overseas. Maybe someone knows something, or knows someone else who does. Or maybe someone who wasn't even previously familiar with this story will be able to piece together all of the jigsaw pieces that I have provided, and perhaps even some that you might find that I didn't, and then be able to paint a picture of what really happened that I'm unable to formulate using my tiny brain. It could just be the case that 11 footballers died on a football pitch from a single bolt of lightning in a freak accident 23 years ago, followed by accusations of witchcraft, before the news cycle quickly moved on due to the thousands of others dying in DR Congo in brutal conflict every day at the time, rendering the tale of the footballers and the lightning bolt either unremarkable or just unimportant in light of the ever-changing situation that was unfolding on the ground. But maybe, just maybe, there is more to this story than has ever previously been reported. So, if you think you know anything, or discover anything, tweet me. And then tweet me again, since I'll probably miss it, until I finally respond. I will gather any evidence that can be found in relation to this over time, and who knows, maybe one day we will crack this case in a part 2, creating the very first HITC Sevens world exclusive. And it wouldn't be a bad world exclusive to start off with, would it now? In fairness, there has been a bit of original journalism in some of my other documentaries, I won't be too hard on myself, but nothing quite on this scale. So yeah, that is where we leave things. Unresolved, but not despondent. Having watched Don't F with Cats and other such horrifying and bizarre tales, I am well aware of the impact of added manpower and investigation, so why couldn't we unearth something new? And even if 11 players really did die, as reported, at least we could perhaps properly honour them and give them a more accurate account of who they were, who the team was, and what actually happened to them. Thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and as I say, feel free to tweet me if you think that you can help. You can find me on Twitter via the username @HITC Sevens. It is The same username on Instagram, though, I am even less likely to respond on there. And obviously, make sure, as ever, that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens on YouTube.